It saddens me to say that the president who campaigned on being the most transparent administration in history has demonstrated the most abuse of power and corruption in history. I don't think I can say it any better than Jonathan Turley, who is a left-leaning constitutional law professor, testified before the House of Representatives, and he said, President Obama has become the embodiment of the imperial presidency. Barack Obama is the president Richard Nixon always wished he could be. Now that is, Jonathan Turley voted for Barack Obama in 2008. That is his indictment. There ought to be, I think, liberals and moderates and anyone who's concerned about rule of law and our constitutional structure ought to be saying the same thing. When you take the abuse of power, let's take the IRS as one example, although each of the examples you laid out, Fast and Furious is an outrage, Benghazi is an outrage. Let's take the IRS as one example of the broader outcome. It was about 9 months ago that the Inspector General of the Department of Treasury concluded the IRS had wrongfully targeted conservative groups, Tea Party groups, pro-Israel groups, pro-life groups. The day that news broke, President Obama publicly said he was outraged, he was angry, and the American people had a right to be angry. And he pledged he would work hand in hand with Congress to get them on. Eric Holder said he was outraged. That was 9 months ago. Fast forward 9 months, what's happened? In 9 months, not a single person has been indicted. In 9 months, the victims of the targeting still haven't been interviewed. In 9 months, Lois Lerner has now twice gone before Congress and pleaded the fifth, which is worth reminding everyone, is raising your hands and saying, if I answer your questions, I may implicate myself in criminal conduct. That is a senior government official at the IRS twice pleading the fifth. And most shockingly, we've now discovered that Eric Holder appointed to lead the investigation a major Obama donor who gave over $6,000 to President Obama. This is shameful. And then the president has the temerity to go on Bill O'Reilly and say there's not a smidgen of corruption. Well, when you appoint a political hack and Obama donor to lead the investigation, and you don't interview any of the witnesses, and you don't indict anyone, no one should be surprised that the investigation designed to cover up the wrongdoing has not exposed the wrongdoing. And, you know, a few weeks back, Eric Holder was testifying before the judiciary. And I, very gently, asked him a few questions. And in particular, I went through that timeline and I pointed out attorneys general for both parties have a long tradition of independence, of commitment to the rule of law. So that when serious allegations of abuse of power were raised against Richard Nixon, his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, appointed Archibald Cox as a special prosecutor to get to the truth and pursue justice. And when serious ethical allegations against Bill Clinton were raised, his Attorney General, Janet Reno, a Democrat, appointed Robert Fisk as an independent counsel. The question I asked Eric Holder, they said, are you willing to follow the bipartisan tradition of attorneys general going back for decades and demonstrate fidelity of law, appoint a special prosecutor with meaningful independence who, at a minimum, is not a major Obama donor? And his answer, I'm sorry to say, was very simple. No. I see no reason to lack confidence in this investigation, led by a major Obama donor that hasn't interviewed the victims, that hasn't indicted anyone, that hasn't uncovered anything, and hasn't tried. As I observed at that hearing, would you trust John Mitchell to investigate Richard Nixon? And let me point out to each of you, listen, the mainstream media does not want to cover this. They behave like the palace guards, protecting President Obama. I think they justify it. Well, he's our guy. We agree with what he's trying to do. Maybe he's kind of abused things a little bit. Okay, the monitors in our newsroom were crazy about that. They actually were utterly silent about that. Let me just say, it's a digression. If I'd gone on Fox News and said the Obama administration is going to send government monitors to the newsrooms across this country, I would have been dismissed as a kook who's worried about black helicopters.
And that's
A
just
wacko bird. Well, I actually have my tinfoil hat in the car. But, and when the Obama administration does it, the media, like sheep, just bleed along. The IRS is the most feared agency in all of government. Richard Nixon tried to use the IRS to target his political enemies, and actually the IRS refused. They didn't go through with it, and he was rightly excoriated by members of his own party in a bipartisan way for trying to use the IRS as a political bludgeon. The Obama administration not only tried, it succeeded, it continues to do so to this day, and it's trying to codify the rules to make them permanent. And the media is utterly silent, refusing to cover this. If this were Richard Milhouse Nixon, it'd be a front page on every newspaper every single day over and over again. Instead, what do we hear about? There was apparently some traffic in New Jersey. That's the biggest scandal in the history of the country, was a lane on a bridge closed. And not the IRS being used to persecute the citizens. And that's why I say the men and women around this room, you all matter incredibly because you can shine a light. And you may feel like, well, gosh, as I'm sitting here blogging, I don't have the resources of the New York Times or of CBS. Just say this. Dan Randall discovered the power of